Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Lid Bashing, where the L stands for Legions, the I stands for Imperialis, and the bashing stands for kitchen table full of kit bashing. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to look at the hot off the press, released today, this very calendar day, the Community FAQ project. Now this started on the unofficial Legions Imperialis Discord, on the rules discussion tab, which is where all the rules discussions should be happening, notwithstanding all the many rules discussions that happen on the tactics and list building and even the hobby pages. But generally speaking, I'm not very active on the rules discussion side. I'm quite active on the list building, tactics, and obviously the hobby side, but I'm not very often on Discord at all, and when I am on Discord, I'm not on the rules bit. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I say interested to see. I'm always honest with you about whether you're watching a blind reaction or one where I've seen it before. And I have seen it before. I've read it in quite in depth, so I know the bits I agree with, the bits I disagree with, the bits we need to talk about, the bits that are fully clear and fixed up by this, and the bits that aren't. So first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to user Arhurt. And everyone who contributed on the Discord and on the discussions. It's a really good document, especially while we're waiting / never ever going to get an FAQ on an official side of things. Then again, never say never. We got a very quiet, not even posted about update to the Cybernetica support formations. So, maybe they might just start updating the digital files without even telling us. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Stranger things have happened. So, first of all, great project, very, very useful. They've laid out their kind of plans, like the reasons for this, where they've opted for rules as written, where they've opted for rules as intended. And 99% of this I am in full agreement with. Even where I disagree that that's what's supposed to be the case, I think, generally speaking, interpreting purely rules as written, which is what the project claims to do, yeah, it's there, with one big exception where I think they have dropped the ball a little bit on it. But I did go on to the rules bit of the Discord to discuss that and found that lots of people said, yeah, but we don't like the original rule. And 2 people were like, no, it is still ambiguous because XYZ. They didn't convince me. But, we can all discuss it in the comments as we go. So to start off with, they've said that this is unofficial. This is a fan project. No one's pretending that any of these decisions come from Games Workshop. This isn't a director's commentary or anything like that. This is fans getting together, coming to a consensus. First thing, so you can't be cross with them. If you come to a different conclusion, that's fine. Okay? There should be nothing but laud and congratulations to these people who've put in the effort. I do not want to see anyone being mean to them, even if you disagree, but I don't think you should. So, what they've said is that it's primarily rules as written, focuses on interpreting the rules as written in the rulebook. Rules as intended as last resort, so only uses rules as intended when absolutely necessary, and that it's community driven. Those are the 3 main features. I think it succeeds on the last one, absolutely. The first 2, 99% of the time. So without further ado, let's break into it. It starts off with a very similar disclaimer saying, that they're aiming for rules as written. They've, I think, bitten themselves in the whatsits with this paragraph here. Rules as intended can be a pitfall because it's subjective. What one player believes the design is intended can differ significantly from another player's interpretation. This can lead to disagreements and make it difficult to reach consensus on rulings. Additionally, rules as intended could be used to justify almost any ruling by abstractly claiming that it aligns with the spirit of the rules, even if it contradicts the literal wording. Which is true, which is why I got slightly perplexed and took it to the Discord when something later on, I think, does claim it aligns with the spirit of the rules, even though it directly contradicts the literal wording. But we'll get to that when we come to it. So let's have a look. It gives you the option to submit a question, please do, and join in the rules discussion, please do. So, let's go through the rules one by one. Drop pod, hull, and doors. The question was, should drop pods be deployed with doors open or closed? If open, how do you measure the range from them? From the doors or the hull? Answer, you ignore any insignificant elements such as protruding weapons or bases. You must agree with your opponent before the game whether the open doors of drop pods count as insignificant or not. Starting off with a bit of a non-answer, but I think the right answer, because lots of us have glued them shut anyway. Lots of us 3D print them with the door shut anyway. And finally, if you look at a drop pod model, the guns are in the middle at the top. The guns aren't on the very end. So both in terms of fluff, in terms of how many peoples are modelled, and in terms of is a door, an open door, really an important part of the model? I think no. I think the right choice here that they're implying there is doors aren't significant. It would be the same as an aerial sticking out, or an open door on a rhino. If you've modelled your rhino with the front hatch open, does that mean it has that much extra to its base? No. They've got an obvious turret, and it's right at the top, which also happens to be pretty much the middle of the model. So, yeah, it's a bit of a silly one, but I think the right call is decide with your opponent whether you really think an open door is significant, and if you do think it's significant, do you really think it's significant, or do you just want an extra inch on the charge? I don't know. But yeah, right call there. It doesn't say whether they are significant or not. It does say if you agree with your opponent that it is or not. That's what determines whether you measure from there. Garrisoning automated sentries. Can units with 0 move characteristic, for example tarantulas, embark, disembark from transports, and garrison, leave garrison from buildings? Answer yes, as they are activated in the movement phase, despite not having an order. So there you go. And I that's the main thing. You garrison if you activate them in the movement phase, and they're within, in base contact with the structure. So if you disembark them, which isn't a movement, you disembark them from a vehicle, and they can be put in vehicles because they're infantry, and in all the fluff they've always been able to go in vehicles, they've always been able to drop podded in. That's not an issue. The issue is whether once they are deployed, whether they can garrison. And I think they can, because garrisoning isn't a movement, it's just what happens when you activate during the movement phase, and they do activate during the movement phase. Model placement after a structure collapse. If a structure is destroyed, can/must surviving models be placed engaged with models that were touching the structure? Answer, they can, but they do not need to. The controlling player decides. So any model that survives is placed by the controlling player within the new area of difficult terrain, as close as possible to it if no space remains, and they are free to place them wherever they desire, as long as they respect these constraints and are adhered to. Notice that this placement does not constitute movement, and ignore the restrictions laid out in the engagement zone sections. So if you are in a building and you were engaged with someone attacking the building, and then the building's exploded, you're not expected to go, oh, that was bad. Oh, better go back to the fight. No. If you fall down a collapsed building, that disengages you. As long as you're placed somewhere in the rubble, you're fine. That sticks with the rules. Again, good choice. I don't think there's any reason to suggest that you would need to place them back in engagement. If nothing else, because you don't know which one's paired off with which in terms of physical pairing. You may know mentally which one was which, but physical pairing, they're just engaging the building, and that happens in the rules to represent engaged with the infantry inside the building. So yeah, again, good choice. I think does fit rules as written and rules as intended as well. I don't think it's very sensible to think that rules as intended would be, I am in this building battling, shoving my bayonet at someone out of the window. Oh no, the building's destroyed. Help, I've fallen down, crawling to my feet. And then the first thing you think of isn't, what the hell was that? Let's get out of here. It's, oh, let's get back to stabbing that guy with my bayonet. No, I don't think that makes sense. So, good call there. Flyers, skimmers, and dangerous terrain tests. Do flyers, jump packs, and skimmers suffer the effects of dangerous terrain for moving across it? Answer, skimmers and jump packs detachments may ignore the movement penalties of dangerous terrain, but not the potential damage received from moving over these. I am certain this is not rules as intended, but just as I am certain as it is not rules as intended, I am certain it is rules as written. It specifically says in the rules, jump packs and hovers and skimmers, they ignore movement penalties. It doesn't say they ignore all penalties. It specifically says they ignore movement penalties. If it meant all penalties, why even put the word movement in there? It would just say ignore penalties, and it doesn't. So, do I think that's what they meant? No, I think they probably meant skimmers and jetpacks could jump over dangerous terrain. That's not what they said. If that's what they meant, they should have said it. So again, if you want to house rule it, that's fine, but rules as written, good choice. Dedicated transports and coherency. Do dedicated transports have to remain in coherency with the units that disembarked? No, they are different detachments. Absolutely. Even if they're dedicated, if they take up a separate transport detachment slot, they still count as a different attachment. It's awkward because the rules about dedicated detachments on the individual formations say this unit may be upgraded with transports, which sounds like the same wording as when you upgrade a unit by adding more models to it. But this is the problem with Games Workshop not having a thesaurus and not be willing to use different words. It's the same reason like 4 different things use the support word and 3 different rules use the morale word. It's just bad lack of thesaurus there. It's not the same. You take a separate dedicated transport detachment. It is not a detachment, an extra couple of models or bases that happen to be transports attached to that unit. Yeah. So yeah, rules as written and as intended, both on that one. Garrisoning asks for transport. Can I garrison a structure by disembarking from a transport right away? Answer no. Disembark first, then use a future activation to move the disembarked attachments into the structure. Yes. Disembarking is not an activation. It's not a movement. So disembarking, you just get out. That's it. If then you want later on to use your move to get in the building, do. But getting out of a vehicle is not a movement. It is not an activation. It's just something that happens. That's how transport works. If a transport moves, you can choose to take the unit out of it at any point during that movement. Fine. It's not a movement. It's not an activation. You can't disembark. You can't garrison straight out of a disembark. Master Tactician targeting. I've seen debate about this, and I agree that it is still a debate. I don't think it's clear-cut, but I agree with this ruling. Can you change the order of more than one not yet activated detachment within 6 inches of a Master Tactician, or just a single detachment? The issue is, it says any different friendly detachment that has yet to be activated this round. That could, now if it meant one, it would have said one different friendly detachment, or any one different friendly detachment, any single different enemy detachment. But if it meant many, it would have said any number of different friendly detachments that have yet to be activated this round. And it doesn't say either of those. It says any different friendly detachment. And that could be either, and it depends on the question being asked. If I said, to use an example from the chat, if I said, asked someone, oh, which biscuit can I have? And they said, any of them. Lovely, I know I want one biscuit. If I say, how many biscuits can I have? And they say, any of them. I can take as many as I want. And the example I used in the chat was if I went to a coffee shop and the shopkeep said to me, oh, you can have any biscuit with that coffee. And I go, thanks. And I took 20 biscuits. I would be in the wrong there. I said, but you said I could have any biscuits. As I know, I said you could have any biscuit. Yes, it can mean, any of them within range, any number of them within range, but it doesn't. It just says any. I am erring on the side of just one. I will hear the argument, and if someone absolutely insists it should be more than one, I'm happy to play it that way with them, but I'm on this guy's side. I think it's supposed to be just one. The other argument I've seen against this, and that I've actually mentioned there, was that it says issue commands, being misleading, making you think several commands, but command isn't a rule in the game. It's issuing orders. What is issuing a command? Is issuing a command issuing one order? Is issuing a command several orders? A command is not a rule in the game. Orders are, and it says any detachment that is yet to be activated this round can have their order changed. It is ambiguous. I'm not going to say it's clear cut, but I think this is the right call. Shooting in the movement phase and morale checks. Question: do point defense shots fired in the movement phase but not on Overwatch cause morale checks? Do bombing runs cause morale checks? No. This, again, I'm amazed this was a question because it's very, very explicit. Not a lot of the morale system is explicit. The morale system is silly and worded terribly. This one isn't. It says when you lose half your force, half your current detachment size in a single shooting attack, but only if it's in the first fire, advancing fire, or as part of Overwatch. It tells you those 3 times. Point defense during the movement phase isn't one of those times. A bombing run in the movement phase isn't one of those times. It tells you those times. Advancing fire, first fire, Overwatch. Saying, oh, but what about this? No. But what about this other one? No, it's not one of those. It's very clear, this one. So good choice, good call. Yes. Destroying transports during Overwatch. When destroying a transport during Overwatch, at what point in its movement path are the contents forced to disembark from the destroyed transport? Answer: take all casualties at the end point of the transporting detachment's movement, while determining line of sight and hit modifiers as per the page 53 sidebar, like normal. And the context it gives is the timing sidebar of the core rulebook provides a precedent for resolving the effects of Overwatch at the end of the detachment's activation. This implies that other rules that result from firing Overwatch would also be resolved after the current unit's activation is complete. So yes, I think that's the right call. It may seem silly that if you have a tank's going from here to here and you blow it up there, that it skids to a halt all the way over there and then people get out. But, you know, the whole game's an abstraction. It doesn't really look like that. This isn't really a soldier. I don't know if you can tell that that isn't a real soldier that I'm holding in my fingers. The whole thing is an abstraction. And yes, it may seem silly, but that's the rules as written. There is precedent for other effects that follow the same timeline. So yeah, good shout. Overwatch and drop pods. Can you shoot Overwatch at the initial model placed down when deep striking? No, because it's not a movement. It's an immediate thing that happens. They activate during the movement phase and drop, but again, it's an abstraction. We know in our heads that that means it's going, but it doesn't. In terms of the game, it's not on the board, then it is on the board. It hasn't moved, you can't Overwatch it. If there was a rule that specifically said you could intercept drop pods, then you could, but Overwatch can't. So again, good choice. Cyclops, Blast and Structures. Again, if any of these rules is definitely not rules as intended, but absolutely rules as written, this is one. A blast marker from a Cyclops demolition vehicle cannot hit a unit garrisoned within a structure. No, because the blast marker has to be placed over the demolition vehicle, and that makes the central hole not over the structure, so the structure's safe. It's very silly. That is clearly not what's intended, but that is definitely the rules as written. Sorry, even though Cyclops is a demolition vehicle by definition, it can't demo buildings. It's silly, it needs a rewording, but rules as written, that is just simply the case. Sorry, not sorry. Breakpoints and casualties. Do units that do not count when calculating breakpoint, automated sentries, dedicated transports and drop pods, that are destroyed over the course of the game count towards reaching the breakpoint during play? As per the rules as written, yes, they are counted, and formations with automated sentries and dedicated transports are easier to break. However, this is highly unintuitive, and we encourage players and tournament organisers to house rule that these detachments are ignored for counting towards the breaking point. So here they've said strictly yes, but that seems so completely against what's intended, we recommend house ruling otherwise. And again, it's hard to disagree with this, really. Yes, like they don't count when calculating breakpoints, but yeah, I don't know. It's very silly that you put them in your yeah, I don't know how else to explain this than it's a badly worded rule. Rules as written, yeah, it makes units with automated sentries and dedicated transports much easier to break, because they don't count for increasing your breakpoints, but they do count as destroyed models when counting against it, which means you could have like 2/3 of your models still on the table, but be broken because all your dedicated transport detachments have been killed. It's stupid, but I have to agree with them. Hopefully it gets fixed. If a detachment in the broken formation loses a fight and is forced to make a morale test, Do they suffer the -1 to the roll in addition to rolling 2 dice and taking the lowest? Yes, the -1 for being broken does apply to these checks. That's just kind of, that's what the rule says. It may seem counterintuitive that you get a bonus and also a negative, but you know, that -1 difference might be a big thing. So yeah. Leviathans in base to base with garrisoned structures. Can Leviathans use their wreck ability against garrisoned structures? No, because they're engaged and pinned. Again, definitely not rules as intended in my opinion, but definitely rules as written. Big, you know, massive things like this that have wrecker that aren't pinned and can attack and shoot anyway can activate during the first fire or advancing fire stage, you know, whatever, they can use wrecker. As written, a Leviathan that is in base contact with a building, and it can get there because it has wrecker, so it doesn't need to charge, it can just advance into the building, but it then becomes engaged and pinned because it's engaged with the other infantry inside because of Walker, and then the infantry have the same combat level, and you know, they're both engaged and they're both pinned. So it's silly. It means that wrecker basically just means you can like march, I suppose, or advance, and if you survive the battle, then you can try and take down the vehicle or take down the building afterwards. But you know, that's all you can do. You have wrecker, so you can advance into combat rather than marching into combat or charging into combat, but you then can't shoot until you're out of that combat. It seems silly. I do not think that's what's intended. That is what it says. Here we get to the one that I agree with, rules as intended, or at least agree with in terms of the best way to play, but I do think this is a wrong call if you're going for a rules as written document. The question is, does a detachment that fails a morale check due to losing a combat receive a fallback order in addition to making a withdrawal move? And the answer they've gone with is no, they simply withdraw as detailed on page 64. Additional context, even though the morale test itself is detailed on page 64, the text that determines combat results clearly specifies its own unique resolution method found on the withdraw section of page 62. This is how I've always played it until about 2 weeks ago when I was in a conversation with someone from the London Wargaming Guild and they convinced me I was wrong. Having been convinced I was wrong on this, and it took a lot, it was a big discussion looking at the rules, but I think the only reason I thought it was wrong was it seemed icky, and it seems icky is not a good argument for saying it's not rules as written. Rules as written, it says, oh, you trigger a morale check. To find out what a morale check is, go to page 64. You go to page 64. There are 3 paragraphs that tell you what a morale check is. The first paragraph tells you how you roll a dice. You roll a single d6 for a morale check. You add any modifiers that affect morale. You then compare that with your morale check characteristic. The second paragraph, the first sentence, says if your roll is lower than your morale check, then you fail. The second sentence is if you fail a morale check, doesn't say in the shooting phase or anyway, it just says if you fail a morale check, you get given a fallback order. The third sentence says if it is not lower, then you pass, and that's the end of it. You don't even know that you've succeeded the test until you've read that whole paragraph. You can't even go back to this because you haven't done the morale check. The morale check includes giving a fallback right in the middle between checking to see if you failed, checking to see if you've passed. Fail, you failed, get a fallback, then see if you've passed. You have, good, lovely, ends, nothing else happens. And then the third paragraph is telling you all the minutiae that you can't take 2 morale checks in a single phase. There's a bit just before it that anything with morale dash can never be given a fallback token, things like that. All 3 of those paragraphs are just the protocol of how to do a morale check. This says, do all of that apart from this one sentence, which seems definitely not rules as written. Rules as intended, better way to play the game, yeah, absolutely. But that's not what this document's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be giving you rules as written, and just ignoring a sentence because you don't like the fact of them getting fallback and them getting a withdrawal in the same phase. Yeah, it seems icky, but there's nothing saying that that can't happen. And there's several sentences saying that yes, you do both. So you lose the combat, take a morale check. To find out what a morale check is, go to page 64. Go to page 64. I see if I failed. I have failed, so I give it a fallback token. Have I passed? No, I haven't passed. I then go back to the combat resolution. It then says, having done that morale check, having done that, if you did pass it, then yeah, nothing else happens. But if you failed it, and you know you've failed it because you'll have been given a fallback token, you then immediately make a withdrawal move. That seems to be ruled as written what it says. And I find it very hard, even having been someone who did believe that's not what it meant, looking at that now, I find it very hard to justify ignoring that one sentence that's deeply nested in that paragraph. It's not like it's the beginning or end. It's, here's a thing you do, here's a thing you do, here's a thing you do. That's a morale check. And it's just saying, no, don't do the middle one of those. Do this instead. But it doesn't say instead. So, yeah, I think this is the wrong call. The arguments against it I've seen are that the first paragraph mentions that causing a morale check is different in the shooting phase and in the fight phase, which is true. Causing it is. There are different ways to cause it. In the shooting phase, it's caused by losing half your models. In the engagement phase, it's caused by losing a fight. That's the cause. That paragraph before the first italics, that cause, has nothing to do with what a morale check actually is. What the morale check is those three paragraphs. Rolling a dice, reading a dice and comparing it to your stats, and then checking you're not doing it more than once per phase. You can't look at those three paragraphs and go, I'll follow all of that, apart from this one sentence in the middle. Yeah, the rules as written, I've been convinced of this, and it took a long time for this person to convince me. Their name is Sal, they're lovely. We had a perfectly tied, drawn game, Mechanicum versus Knights. It was a lovely game. But yeah, he convinced me. I was wrong. And having been convinced I'm wrong, I guess it's like, if you're a converted believer, suddenly your belief is stronger than someone who's believed it all along. So yeah, maybe that's what the case is. But in any case, I don't get this. The other argument against it is that there's a line at the bottom that says, if you've withdrawn this turn, then you can't shoot. And people say, well, if you've got a fallback token anyway, that sentence is meaningless because you couldn't shoot with a fallback token. But it's not meaningless because Implacable exists. Implacable units, like all salamanders, don't take morale checks, so would never get a fallback token, but they can choose to withdraw if they want to. So without that line at the bottom, an Implacable unit could withdraw, shoot them again, shoot them when they charge next in Overwatch, be back in combat without ever taking a morale check, without ever losing their order token. And the fact that you could choose to move out, even though you're pinned, you've lost the combat, and Implacable means that you can choose to withdraw and then shoot them again because you haven't been given a fallback token, that would completely break Implacable. Completely. So that's why that sentence is there, to make sure that even if you're Implacable, you can't shoot after withdrawing. Even if you haven't failed a morale check, withdrawing is a choice. That means you do not get to shoot again. For everything else, there's MasterCard and or a fallback token. So yeah, I think this is the only one that I think I completely disagree with their summary and where they've come to. Again, come at me in the comments by all means if you think there's a reason why rules as written, I'm wrong, and Sal is wrong, and rules as intended, I'll be on your side. I've only ever played it this way. I think this way is better for the game. It is not rules as written. And seeing as they did the Leviathan thing, the rules as written, seems weird that this one they'll go, seems icky, do it the other way. But yeah, spent a while talking about that, sorry. But hopefully it'll make good comments in the comments, so chat about that. Yeah. Garrisoned structures and firestorm weapons. How are detachments garrisoned inside structures affected by firestorm weapons Garrison detachments use the entire structure as their base for rules purposes, so use the template to determine target eligibility. Yes. If the template covers at least 50% of the base of garrison structures, all models inside are considered to be under the template. Yes. Again, garrisoning a building is an abstraction. You're not imagining that the number of people are exactly taking up the space, if nothing else, because a unit of like 10 bases of 5 models each can fit in the tiniest building according to the rules, because you're all sardining up inside. So yeah, it's an abstraction. It may not seem sensible, but that's clearly what it means. Abilities with a range and garrisons. How are models garrisoned within structures with abilities that work within a radius? Garrison detachments use the entire structure as the base again, so use the entire structure to measure distances. Yes, if you've got a whole bunch of missile launchers inside and you're aiming, you can choose from any point on that structure for all the models inside. It's an abstraction. Don't think about it too hard. Terrain cover safe stacking. Does the to-hit penalty for dangerous terrain stack with the to-hit penalty for other types of terrain, obstructing difficult structures? Yes, though bear in mind terrain is usually agreed before the battle, so players must agree to what types of terrain to be used. Again, this seems to be a thing that it doesn't say they don't stack, so we have to assume it does, seeing as it does specify when things don't. So if it doesn't specify, it doesn't. It does. Flyers rear armour. Do models get the -1 AP benefit from shooting at the rear of an aircraft? They've said yes, which is true, but I wonder if technically everyone should all the time rules as written, because a flying aircraft is considered to be in line of sight to everything on the board. So if you are in range of its rear, you can shoot at its rear because you have line of sight to it, regardless of where you are orientated to it. Again, I don't think that's rules as intended, but I think, again, strictly rules as written, I think if you're in range of its rear, whether you're facing its rear or it's not, you have line of sight to its rear and can shoot its rear. Don't play it that way. That's stupid, but rules as written. Skyfire weapons versus non-flyers. Now, people in my comments have disagreed with my interpretation of this, but I like that they agree with me. Can Skyfire weapons target detachment that are not flyers? Yes, fine. Hit normally. Additional context. Notice that the reduction in Overwatch hit penalty is also used against the non-flying targets. The rules as written just say that Skyfire weapons don't have as bad an Overwatch penalty. It doesn't say only when targeting flyers, it just says in general. Do I think that's rules as intended? Probably not. Rules as written, that is what it says. So good choice for that one as well. Split firing Titan weapons versus structures. Can a Titan split its weapon dice and target structures? Yes, but only if the structures are designated as secondary targets. This seems like another obvious one that people just wanted to check because, yeah, you're splitting your fire. You have to choose before you fire where your weapons are going. You can't just aim at one until it dies, then shift. You have to decide first. But yeah, one of those targets can be a building. If it's a weapon that can target a building, why not? Yeah. Wreck weapons and garrison structures. How does the wrecker weapon trait work? A knight cannot charge a building. Do they fight the garrison detachments too? Well, it's not about charging a building. It's if you've got wrecker, you don't even need to charge. You can march and end in base contact with the building. And if you're in base contact with the building, you're engaged with the units inside. That's kind of just how it works. Yeah, I think wrecker, the only downside with wrecker that makes it awkward is when you've got something like a Leviathan that is the same scale as the things inside and therefore is pinned, therefore can't shoot, which is how wrecker happens in the shooting phase. But in terms of charging a building, even if you can't charge the building, you have wrecker, you don't need to charge it. Walk up to it. Like, that's how wrecker works. That's why there is the specific exception for if you have a wrecker weapon, you can end in base contact with a garrisoned building. That's just something you can do. It's specifically in there as an exception. So yeah, this seems like the checking rather than actually coming up with a big gotcha. It's just like is this really how it works? Yeah, that is how it works. Tactical strength of units in transport. If infantry are embarked in a transport within 3 inches of an objective marker, is their tactical strength counted, or is it just the transport, or both? Only the models on the table count. If you're embarked in a transport, again, it's abstraction. You're actually in reserve when you're embarked on a transport. It's the same reason you can't shoot out of the windows of a Rhino. Like, those 8 models aren't inside those 4 Rhinos. That's just, like, physically they're not. They're over there. These rhinos represent where they eventually will pop out. When they do, they count. When they're in there, they're not. You can't defend an objective if you're inside a tin can. Get out of the tin can first, then you can control that objective. And that brings us to the end. Yeah, so generally speaking, as a doc, I think it's great. It's amazing that the community has done this. Thank you everyone who's been involved with it. Thank you especially to the user who headed up. I'm going to have to check and remember their name. Arhurt, yeah. So Arhurt especially, but all of you who got involved in this, great. The fact that there's all those questions and the only one I actively disagree with in terms of rules as written is one. All the others, I agree with your rules as written, even if I think that's not what's intended. But as a rules as written document, yeah, lovely. Do read it yourself. Tell me what you think of that. Are there any that you disagree with? Do you vehemently disagree with me? Are you like I was 3 weeks ago and think that no, you absolutely don't get a fallback from combat? Or do you think actually rules as written, yeah, there's nothing to say you don't? Or somewhere in between. What do you think? Please get in the comments. Please do join the Legions Imperialis Reddit and comment on there. And again, join the Discord and join in the rules discussion. The only way this is going to be a community consensus is if the community consensuses. So, please join and give in your 2 cents. And with that, I guess that's it for this video. I've gone through the whole thing. I've sung my praises. I haven't said thank you to all of you for watching. I haven't said thank you to all of you for subscribing. I haven't said thank you to all my Patreons. I've got a Patreon project here, a little Alpha Legion character that has just been filmed and finished. So I'll be taking the glamour shots for him, and that'll be the next lit bashing video out. In the meantime, I hope you're playing lots and lots of games, and when you can't undercoat your models because the weather's terrible, I hope you're getting lots of fun indoor times and not going out in the freezing cold. And with that, my usual peace and love, and of course, keep on lit bashing.